recording now. We are so excited to introduce Melanie Zuch, who's a staff attorney at TakeRoot Justice and recently went with Kabine to his asylum interview. She's going to kick us off by giving a little bit of a presentation on what the asylum interview protocols are during COVID-19. Then we're going to have a bit of a discussion with Shola and with Kabine, as well as Mohammed, about their experiences having their asylum interviews in recent weeks under the new protocols. Finally, we'll open to an audience Q&A. And then you'll all have the chance to ask questions that come up during the session. So with that, Melanie, I'm going to turn it to you to kick things off.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. As Emma said, my name is Melanie Zuch. I am a staff attorney at TakeRoot Justice, and we're an organization that provides legal policy and research support to community-based organizations and grassroots organizations around the city. And yeah, so I want to say, I will talk about kind of what the asylum office protocol has been like in recent times. I do want to give the caveat that things seem to be changing rapidly. So what was true a week ago may not be true next week. And especially with school closures, I don't think any of us really know yet how that is impacting the capacity or operations of the offices. So I would just encourage especially attorneys to reach out to listservs in New York for like the most up-to-date operational information. But basically what's happening is that the offices are open, but with very much reduced staff presence and reduced interviewing. So the last time that this was reported, I think the Newark Asylum Office, which handles cases from applicants from the Bronx and Manhattan, and as well as New Jersey, was doing only 8 interviews a day. And that's a huge reduction from the pre-pandemic numbers. And that's also largely at Varick Street. So Newark opened an office in Manhattan for applicants east of the Hudson River. So applicants from the Bronx and from Manhattan, if your receipt notice says ZNK on it and you'd otherwise have gone to Lyndhurst, New Jersey, that interview is happening at Varick Street in downtown Manhattan. They're working on opening an office in Newark, New Jersey. I believe it's operational, but maybe on a very, very limited basis. For the New York Asylum Office in Bethpage, New York, which from New York City serves applicants from Queens and Brooklyn, they're also doing, I think, probably a dozen interviews a day, like very low numbers. Only like a quarter of their staff is coming in at a time. And so if you do receive an interview notice, and it seems like these offices are not quite keeping up with new filings. So when LIFO, last in, first out, went into effect now, gosh, was it like in 3 years ago, the offices were keeping up with new filings for the most part. So if you filed your asylum application, you would expect that you'd have your interview in the coming months. It doesn't seem like they're quite able to keep up right now. They're prioritizing, that's been my experience, but again, I would triple check that. That's not straight from the office itself. They're prioritizing rescheduled cases, so cases that were taken off the calendar in the early days of the pandemic. And then they'll prioritize the newly filed cases. So they're continuing to follow those priorities, just at much reduced capacity. So if you're scheduled for an interview, you're not allowed to enter into the office before, until 30 minutes before your interview time. And you'll have to wear a mask the whole time and answer COVID contact questions. If you have contact with someone who tested positive for COVID, or you are experiencing symptoms yourself, you should absolutely request to reschedule, and that reschedule request should be granted. it's really important to document the reschedule request. So via email, via fax, it's extremely important to have a written record of the way that you transmitted that reschedule request. If you have had contact recently with a person who tested positive, or if you yourself are experiencing symptoms. Another big change is that you can't bring your own interpreter. So this happened September 23rd, I believe. As of September 23rd, you can no longer bring your own interpreter. A telephonic interpreter will be provided to you. I think there's a list of a couple dozen languages. And so if you speak a language that's not on that list, then you can bring an interpreter. So you can contact the asylum office to make sure. But if you do speak a language on that list, it will just be the telephonic interpreter. And what's different about that is that there's no monitor. So before, you brought your own interpreter, and that interpreter was monitored by someone on the phone. So there was sort of a check on the interpretation. Now it's just the telephonic interpreter. So this is sort of this could be good or bad depending. I mean, sometimes it's difficult to find an interpreter. It's difficult to find an affordable interpreter, and so it's, they're providing one free of cost, but there's no check on that person. So if that's not a good interpreter on the phone, it's sort of hard to have that be detected. And if, also that person is not familiar with your story, you can't practice with them beforehand. So there is specific vocabulary related to one's history that can sometimes be tricky. So yeah, another big change is that when you go in for your interview, you will not be in the same room as your interpreter, or as your attorney, I should say, or the officer. So you'll all be put into separate rooms, and there'll be an iPad in front of you with a video conference already set up. So you can see your attorney, you can see the officer, and then the interpreter is called into that same system. So it's like a four-way call, and you do the entire interview that way. And then the last change is that decisions are now mailed. So there's no pickup. In the past, it had been you pick up your decision 2 weeks later. Now they're all mailed, and not necessarily within that 2-week period. There does seem to be some delay because of staffing shortages. So Emma, you sent me a series of questions. Do you want me to address all those questions now, or should I pause there?
I think if I could just ask you to quickly, if you have one piece of advice for someone who's about to interview, how to prepare for this new format, what would that piece of advice be?
I don't know that I would say my one piece of advice would be sort of similar to what I would have advised before, is triple check with the officer that they have all of the supporting documents that you've submitted. Even if you submit documents the day of the interview, at the interview itself, while it's happening, just confirm with the officer that they have those documents, because you're not in the same room with them. You can't see that they have those documents in the file or not. And I've had so many experiences where the documents don't even make it from the front desk into the file on the same day. So that would be one piece of advice. And otherwise, one other thing, assuming you are unrepresented, and if you detect, it's tricky because if you're relying on interpretation, it's very tricky to detect whether that interpreter is doing a good job or not. But if you have a feeling or detect that maybe something that you said is being misinterpreted, I would recommend bringing it to the attention of the officer, because you don't have that person checking a monitor on the phone anymore. You don't have your own interpreter. So I would just want to make sure that nothing's being misinterpreted, since every word can be really, really important.
Great, thank you, Melanie. I'm going to turn to David.
I was wondering if you could quickly repeat the first part of the advice, like quickly, just for me to translate it.
The first advice is just to double check that the officer has all of the documents that you submitted, whether in advance of the interview or the day of.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm going to turn to Shola, Kabeen, and Mohammed now with a couple of questions that we've prepared, and then we'll open up to questions from the audience. But before we get started, could I ask Shola, Kabeen, and Mohammed, could you just wave so everyone knows who you are? Thank you, thank you. I also want to say that we have some questions we've prepared for Shola, Kabeen, and Mohammed, but we're only asking them generic information about their experience going to the asylum interview during the pandemic. We're not asking about details of their case. And we ask that you guys also, in the questions you ask, respect that as well. So I'm gonna direct my first question to Shola. As part of the new protocols, as Melanie just explained, you're not in the same room as your attorney, the asylum officer, or an interpreter. What was that like for you?
Oh, well, hi everyone. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share with the house. Just like Melanie said, we were all put in separate rooms, only connected via the app, my lawyer and the interpreter. Of course, at first, when we entered, I actually thought my lawyer was going to go the same room with me, but they said no. So she was ushered to her own room, while I was also ushered to my own room. And at some points, my lawyer was asked questions and she answered. And when it was time for me to answer to my own questions too, the interpreter will signal to me. And one funny thing, of course, there were ground rules from the beginning. The interpreter let us know the way the whole process was going to run. He told me, if I ask you a question, when I want you to stop, I will signal you, so you will stop. If I need you to rephrase, if you need me to rephrase the question, so those ground rules, they were stated from the beginning, so it went on like that. So that was the mode of the questionnaire, and it's run for like 1 hour, 45 minutes.
Great, thank you, Shola. I'm going to direct the same question to Kabeen, and Marcus, could you provide interpretation here? What was it like to be in a different room from the attorney and the asylum officer? And then also for Kabeen, since I know you used interpretation, what was it like to have the interpreter on the phone? I want to check in on Marcus. Are you there?
I am. Oh, sorry, I forgot I need to translate that. Kabeen, la question était quel était votre ressenti vis-à-vis d'être dans différentes pièces, que l'agent qui posait les questions et l'avocat, et d'avoir l'interprète au téléphone? Et est-ce que vous pouvez nous expliquer votre expérience d'avoir l'interprète au téléphone?
Oh, c'est Mohamed So.
Ok, merci.
Yeah, ok. Bon, l'expérience que déjà, je m'étais dit que...
I think the question was for Kabeen, right?
Yeah, let's start with Kabeen and then we'll do Mohammed.
Okay. Nous allons commencer avec Kabeen et Mohamed, vous serez juste après. Merci beaucoup.
Ok, merci. Merci. Je commencerai tout d'abord à remercier Maria et l'organisation RIP, et ainsi que mon expérimentée avocate Melanie. Donc, l'expérience, on était dans trois salles. L'avocate était dans une salle, moi j'étais dans une salle, et celle qui nous interviewait, c'était une femme, elle était dans une salle aussi. Donc, je n'ai pas eu beaucoup de stress parce que j'étais un peu à l'aise quand je suis en face de l'ordinateur, c'était iPad, donc j'étais un peu en face, et puis je voyais mon avocate sur l'écran, et celle qui interviewait aussi était sur l'écran. Donc, j'étais plus à l'aise comme ça aussi. Moi, quand même, je n'ai pas eu de frustration par rapport à ça. Mais par rapport à l'interprète, j'ai eu 2 interprètes, en fait. Le premier interprète, parce que mon avocate parle très, très bien le français. Donc, elle n'arrivait pas à interpréter très bien ce que je disais. Donc, l'avocate a été obligée d'interrompre pour intervenir pour qu'on puisse changer d'interprète. Et ça a été un grand atout pour moi parce que si l'avocate aussi ne s'exprimait pas un peu en français, ça a été un grand problème parce que ce que je disais, il n'arrivait pas à transmettre réellement ce que je disais. Et l'avocate a été un apport par rapport à ça. Et on a été obligé de changer d'interprète pour que je puisse continuer mon interview.
Merci. Juste pour une question de clarification, pouvez-vous répéter par rapport à quand vous avez dû changer d'interprète?
Oui, parce que c'est au téléphone en fait. On n'envoie plus les interprètes, c'est au téléphone. Donc quand je parle, c'est au téléphone maintenant que l'interprète interprète et l'interview, celle qui fait l'interview aussi parle. Maintenant, on interprète au téléphone et je reprends. Donc à un moment donné, tout ce que je disais ne passait pas. Donc l'avocate aussi attend tout ce qu'on dit. Donc c'est l'avocate, elle est dans sa salle, elle comprend aussi. Donc c'est elle qui a intervenu pour dire non, ce que l'interprète est en train de dire ne colle pas avec ce que je suis en train de dire. Donc, si on pouvait changer d'interprète.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Je vais me permettre de traduire tout ce que vous avez dit. Merci.
Merci.
So, Kabine wanted to start to thank Maria, Riff, and her wonderful lawyer, Melanie. So the first question was regarding how it was to be in different rooms from the lawyer and the agent who does the interview. Kabine was sharing how he felt comfortable because even though it was in different rooms, he had on his screen the lawyer and the agent in charge of the interview. And it felt comfortable, not too distant, and it felt good. Having everybody on the screen made him just able to do a correct interview. Regarding the interprets, having a lawyer who speaks languages was very helpful because at some point the interpret was not translating correctly, and the lawyer was able to come in and say that it wasn't faithful enough as an interpretation, and they were able to change the interprets to make sure Kabine's story was faithfully described.
Great. And then, Mohammed, do you want to answer the same question?
Yeah, je voulais dire que je commence aussi par remercier toute l'équipe de RIFT. Et exactement, j'ai connu la même chose. Je n'avais pas... Je ne sais pas si vous m'entendez bien, parce que c'est sur le haut-parleur de la voiture.
On vous entend bien.
Ah, OK. Donc, j'ai connu la même chose. On était dans 3 pièces. J'avais pas d'avocat. J'étais venu avec un interprète. Et l'officier aussi c'était une dame, elle aussi était dans une autre pièce. Donc, il y avait 3 salles différentes. Et comme les autres l'ont dit, on était en vidéoconférence. Bon, moi, malheureusement, je ne voyais que l'officier. Je ne voyais pas mon interprète. Mais elle aussi, elle me voyait. Donc, ça s'est très bien passé. Il n'y avait pas de stress. Comme déjà, j'avais commencé à suivre une formation avec Zoom. Donc, les vidéoconférences, j'avais commencé à m'habituer. Donc, ça s'est très bien passé. C'est vrai que ça a pris environ 3 heures de temps. Environ 4 heures, parce qu'on a fait plus de 3 heures. On a fait environ 4 heures de temps en tout. Et bon, ça s'est très bien passé avec le truc, l'interprétation aussi.
Super. Et l'interprétation ne vous a posé aucun problème? C'était même par téléphone?
Bon, avec l'interprète que j'ai envoyé, bon, quelques rares fois, ce que je disais, il n'arrivait pas à interpréter comme je voulais parce qu'il y a le moniteur qui nous écoutait. Et j'ai remarqué souvent quand je dis quelque chose, il y a le moniteur, quand l'interprète il parle, souvent le moniteur parlait pour essayer de corriger un peu ce que l'interprète a dit. Donc ça s'est passé. Mais j'ai eu aussi, ils ont changé, il y a eu des moniteurs qui étaient là. Après un moment, le moniteur partait. Donc j'ai eu au moins 3 ou 4 moniteurs.
OK, merci beaucoup.
Yeah.
So wanted to also thank Riff, Maria, and his lawyer. Regarding his experience, he had the same situation with 3 different rooms, but he didn't have a lawyer, but he came with an interpreter. So they were all in different rooms. The video conference went pretty well, even though he wasn't seeing his interpreter. Because he followed this formation to this seminar to get used to Zoom and all these video conferences, he didn't feel any sort of stress, and the interview went pretty well. He stressed out the long hours. It was like 3 or 4 hours, and that was very long, but it went really well. Regarding the interpretation, it went well, even though there's still some issues lost in like translation. Everything wasn't fully perfectly translated, but the people in charge of the interview sometimes recognize this issue, and were making sure that So's story was faithfully told.
Great. Thank you all for sharing, and thank you, Marcus, for interpreting. I know it's never easy. We have so many people on the call, and I know many of you have questions. So we want to open it up to audience questions. You can ask your question in the chat and we'll say it for you, or you can ask it yourself by unmuting your microphone. Since we have a lot of people on the call, we might have a couple people speaking over each other, but that's okay. We have plenty of time. The last request I have is, I know we have a ton of providers on today's call. If providers could please wait until the end of the Q&A to ask questions, we want to make sure that the asylum applicants on the call are able to ask their questions first. So with that, I'll open it up. Kamalji, I see you have a question.
Hi, Emma. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Earlier I asked the question regarding the same thing, like living here and working somewhere in a different state. Like right now I am in New Jersey. I'm working in New York. So I don't know, like my company is asking me to move Atlanta. So how I need to move my case, or like what I have to do?
I'll let Melanie field that question to the extent you want to. And Kamaljeet, if you could also send us an email, we can advise a little bit more on an individual basis as well.
Oh, okay.
But Melanie, is there anything you want to say to that topic?
Yeah, I'll say first of all that I can't give individual legal advice without doing a full legal screening. That's really important, and in a confidential setting. If a person moves and needs to change if a person moves, they need to keep USCIS up to date with that new contact information. And there's a form online called the AR11 form. You can also call the contact center, although they're impossible to get on the phone these days. So the easiest way is to do it online, to submit the change of address form, and to let to send a copy of that to the asylum office where your case was or it is filed, and then they will likely transfer it to the office that will have jurisdiction over your case if you move. That's just general advice. But again, for anything specific in your case, please consult an attorney and explain the whole situation. Yeah.
Definitely. But my question is I bought a house in New Jersey. So the company is asking me to go for a project. I don't know how long it will be. So I need to come back, the same scenario.
If you shoot us an email, we'll be able, that's going to be a really individual answer. So we'll be able to connect you with an attorney to address that question. I have another question.
What about the backlog?
What's your question about the backlog?
Because I submitted a case in 2016, how they are working on the backlog. Any update on that?
Yeah, I mean, right now it seems like backlogged, well, because Trump changed the scheduling priorities, this administration changed the scheduling priorities to last in, first out, there's a huge number of cases in the backlog. So it seems to be cases 2016, even some into 2015. There was a certain point where asylum offices were pulling some of the oldest of the old cases, not regularly, because the priorities are still rescheduled cases, then newly filed cases, and then cases moving back in time, so like back into the backlog from recent. So I think that both offices got some way into 2017, moving backwards. But now that the interviews are so limited at both offices, it seems that backlogged cases are not, or are extremely rarely getting scheduled. Again, that's my experience and what I've heard from other practitioners. But that can change as the pandemic unfolds, and also hopefully in a new administration, those scheduling priorities will shift.
We have a lot, thank you, Melanie. We have a lot of questions in the chat. I see a couple questions that are really they're gonna have individual answers, and it's gonna need to be a conversation with an attorney. And so I'm putting in the chat Maria and my emails. If you have an individual question, rather than ask it in this forum, go ahead and send us an email and we can answer it for you. We can connect you with an attorney who can answer it. But moving on through the questions in the chat, Claudia, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Well, my question was, how long ago did they file their asylum? Just to know. Of course, I know I've heard that the newly cases are being called and they're rescheduled, but I just wanted to know in these particular cases, how long ago they did the application.
Sure. Shola, Kabine, and Mohammed, would you like to answer that question? Shola, you're muted.
Oh yeah.
Oui,
Hi.
je peux répondre?
Can I go on?
On va commencer par Shola, and then you will be able to do it. Shola, please. Yes.
Okay. For me, I submitted my application sometimes in December last year, and for some reasons, it was sent back to us for some errors. So eventually, it was reapplied for in January this year. So I was scheduled to have an interview in March, precisely March 19th, before the pandemic started. So, and since then I got hopeful. Sometimes when we come on such forums like this, I used to ask, when are we going to be scheduled? And I got hopes from lawyers, from RIV and other applications too, that very soon. And in no time, I got scheduled for another interview that eventually took place in September 27th. So that's for me.
Kabine ou So, si vous voulez.
Mohamed?
Mohamed, oui, s'il vous plaît.
Ok. Moi, j'ai appliqué en 2016, 2016, et j'ai été appelé pour l'interview le 2 juillet 2020. Mais comment j'ai été appelé? Parce que ça fait déjà 4 ans depuis que j'ai appliqué. Donc, quand j'ai eu 2 ans et demi, je suis allé à l'immigration moi-même. J'ai essayé de savoir pourquoi je n'étais pas appelé, parce que ça faisait plus de 2 ans que j'avais appliqué. Ils m'ont dit, d'attendre, c'était en 2018. On m'a dit d'attendre, on prend les nouveaux, les anciens, ça va venir sur leur tour. Donc, je suis reparti. Maintenant, en décembre 2019, le 26 décembre, je suis encore retourné à l'immigration. Je suis encore demandé pour savoir la situation, ils sont à quel niveau. Et je ne sais pas pourquoi on ne m'appelle pas toujours. Ils m'ont toujours dit la même chose, qu'on prend les nouveaux et que ça va venir. Je ne sais pas, en ce moment, on m'avait dit qu'ils sont sur les gens de 2018, ils vont revenir jusqu'en 2016. Donc, on prend les plus récents. Bon, j'ai trouvé que c'était long. Maintenant, on m'a fait une proposition là-bas. Il y avait 2 choix. Il y avait le expéditif case et puis il y avait une liste d'attente. Donc, expéditif, tu dois prouver que peut-être il y a une situation qui est urgente au pays et que tu as besoin d'être passé rapidement. Là, tu vas donner des preuves pour cela. Et il y a la liste d'attente. On m'a dit qu'il y a la liste d'attente. Si je veux, on peut m'inscrire sur la liste. Au cas où on appelle une personne qui n'est pas prête pour venir faire l'interview, on va m'appeler à sa place si je vais venir. Donc, j'ai dit, oui, ça m'intéresse. Je les ai demandé combien de temps ça peut prendre pour qu'on m'appelle. Le monsieur m'a dit que, bon, il ne sait pas exactement, mais chaque semaine, sur la nouvelle liste d'attente, on peut appeler 1 ou 2 personnes. Mais il y a des semaines aussi, on n'appelle personne. Donc, c'était, comme je vous ai dit, le 26 décembre. Donc dès qu'il a dit, j'ai commencé à me préparer parce que je me suis mis dans la tête, peut-être dans 2 mois ou 3 mois, peut-être ils vont m'appeler. Donc, avec le corona, presque ça ne travaillait pas. Donc, lorsqu'ils ont ouvert seulement les offices, Donc, on m'a appelé au téléphone, c'est pas la lettre que j'ai reçue. C'est par coup de téléphone, on dit c'est Mohamed Sow. J'ai dit oui, c'est toi qui étais venu t'inscrire sur la liste d'attente. J'ai dit oui. On me demande est-ce que tu es prêt pour venir? Parce que c'était, quand tu t'inscris sur la liste d'attente, on ne te donne pas 3 semaines. On peut t'appeler en 24 ou 48 heures ou une semaine. Ça dépend de la date. Donc, moi, on m'avait donné, je crois, 10 jours. On dit est-ce que je peux venir à telle date? C'était le 2 juillet. J'ai dit oui, oui, je peux venir. Donc, quand j'ai accepté, maintenant, ils ont fait la lettre pour moi, pour que je vienne. Ils ont fait la lettre. Ils ont dit, bon, compte tenu à la suite de notre appel téléphonique de telle date, donc vous êtes invité à venir faire l'interview. Donc, c'est à la suite de cela que je suis allé.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Je vais traduire rapidement. So for Mohammed, he filed in 2016. So he went through this long journey when he went in 2018 to ask about his personal case, asking how come the wait was so long. They told him to keep on waiting. He went again last December to ask about his situation, and he was faced with 2 choices, either to go in this urgent list where he has to prove that his case has like under immense urgency, or to go under this short list where people can be called in order to replace some people who didn't come. The issue with this solution is that they can sometimes call 2 people a week, but sometimes none. So you don't know exactly when you would be able to have an interview. But also, as when they call you, it's not, you don't have like much time to prepare. It could be in the next day or in 2 days. For Mohammed, it was 10 days, so it was better to prepare. But there's a lot of uncertainty regarding that situation. When he was called, he had 10 days to prepare his case, and he went in July.
And before we move to Kabeen, Sholan Mohammed, what office did you interview at? New Jersey or New York?
New York.
New Jersey.
Cool. And then Kabeen, if we could hear the same from you.
Oui, j'ai déposé en avril 2006, 2016. Donc, à partir de là, ça fait 4 ans à peu près, sinon 5 ans, que j'ai déposé. Bon, à un moment donné, j'ai demandé à mon avocate, elle m'a dit, bon, actuellement, ils sont en train de prendre les nouvelles personnes, comme l'autre l'a dit. Mais en novembre 2019, 2019, elle a fait une demande de shortlist, comme l'autre l'a dit, sur la liste d'attente. Donc, on m'a mis sur la liste d'attente depuis le mois de novembre passé. Et en septembre, début septembre 2020, ils ont appelé l'avocate pour leur dire que dans une semaine, on a l'interview. Donc, une semaine, l'avocate a intervenu que les dossiers qu'on a, ils ne pourront pas tout étudier pendant une semaine. Donc, ils ont ajouté une autre semaine. Donc, mon interview a été, l'avocate a plaidé pour qu'on ajoute une autre semaine. Donc, cette semaine a été ajoutée et c'est là que je suis parti faire mon interview. Donc, mon dossier était là depuis 4 ans et demi.
Merci beaucoup. He filed he did his file in April 2016. And just like Mohammed, he asked his lawyer to go into the shortlist. So he was able to receive a call early September telling them that he would have 1 week to prepare. But because he was with a lawyer, she was able to request an extra week to be sure that his case was fully prepared and he would be like ready for the final interview.
Great, thank you all. Local, do you want to ask your question? I can also pose it as well. It's a question that, to Melanie. Are the regulations at the New York office the same as offices around the country?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Are the new protocols you prescribed in the New York office the same across the country?
I don't know. I can only speak to the New York office and the New Jersey office. So if if you're, and even then, again, things are changing so quickly. So I would give the office a call if you have any questions about the specific office that you're at.
Great. Yonka, I see you have a couple questions. Would you like to ask yours? I'll ask one of yours that I think is going to be most relevant to the full audience, and you can message us, send us an email for some of these individual questions. But Melanie, are you required to provide tax returns or bank statements or anything during or after the interview process?
I've never seen that happen. So I've never, that's not like a stated requirement for filing for asylum that you need to show that. It depends on the particulars of your case. If there's some reason why the officer needs to see it, they could request it. I can't speak to an individual case.
Great, thanks, Melanie. Dapo, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, everyone. So I had asked the question earlier. I don't know if the link sent to the group was directed to my question. The question is, if you had changed your address at the time of your capturing, how do you update them when you, I mean, if you had a different address when you had your capturing and biometrics, and you have changed the location, how do you change the address? So in case you get an email, or in case you get a mail, you don't get to lose the mail in transit. That's the first one. The second question is, are there any other questions as regards to the general asylum process that you think you might be asked that it's not common to an average person, maybe tax returns like you had asked earlier, or anything else that we need to know?
Did you want me to answer that, Emma? Okay, so for the change of address, there's the AR11 change of address form. You can find it at uscis.gov/AR11. And it's important if you move to keep USCIS notified of any change of your address quickly, so you don't miss any mail. And you can submit it online. I would also print out one and send it directly to the asylum office that your case was filed at, so they know to transfer your case to the new office that has jurisdiction. I'm not sure I understood the second question.
Okay, my second question is, are there any unfamiliar questions that you think, and I think Shola and Mohammed can also help with the question. Are there any unfamiliar questions you think you might be asked at the interview questions that is not common to the regular questions that people experience during the interview process?
In all honesty, every questions you're going to be asked at the interview are already answered in the report submitted by your lawyer, because it's always in that report right before the interviewer that it will be directing questions to you. Throughout the duration of my interview, the interviewer was just asking me, I understand that it is stated here that, so it's the report that your lawyer submitted, which is your original story. So they're not going to ask you anything outside your story. So it's the interview was actually demystified for me, because I thought it was going to be like our Nigerian embassy interview, Dapo, I thought it was going to be something big. But when we finished, I was like, is this all? Would that be all? Because it was just asking me my own questions. So I would like to tell people that it's actually nothing to be afraid of. Just exude confidence and know your story, and that's just it. No unfamiliar question whatsoever. And at the end of it, they gave me a form to fill to give them authorization to email my report to me. So that was just it. There was nothing big at all.
Thank you very much.
Marcus, could you translate for Kabine and Mohammed so we can get their perspective as well?
Yes. La question de Dapo serait, est-ce qu'il y a des questions qui vous ont été posées auxquelles vous n'attendiez peut-être pas ou qui vous ont posé plus de difficultés?
Bon, moi, personnellement, bon, mon histoire était un peu longue, donc ce qui a fait certainement qu'on avait duré. Et je vais revenir un peu par rapport à ce que l'autre avait dit pour les preuves. Parce que je vous avais dit, j'ai eu seulement 10 jours et je n'avais pas encore envoyé mes preuves. Donc, je les avais appelés au téléphone pour savoir comment puis-je envoyer les preuves, puisque je n'avais pas assez de temps. Ils m'ont dit d'envoyer par email. Donc, j'ai envoyé par email. Mais j'ai aussi préparé les preuves physiques pour envoyer avec moi. J'ai dit, in case, comme elle a dit, c'est bien de vérifier cela. Parce que quand je suis allé, la dame me dit qu'elle n'a pas reçu l'email, elle n'avait reçu aucune de mes preuves. Donc, c'est ce jour qu'elle a reçu mes preuves, elle a pris mes dossiers, elle m'a dit d'attendre 20 minutes. Donc, les questions, comme l'autre vient de le dire, c'est sur l'histoire qu'on pose les questions. Donc, tout ce qu'on te pose, c'est sur l'histoire et sur ta nouvelle situation ici. Parce que je pense que le fait que j'étais en formation, je pense aussi que ça aide. Quand tu es en formation aussi, c'est bon parce qu'elle s'est intéressée à ce que je fais aujourd'hui, quelle formation je fais. Et elle a même cherché, j'ai senti qu'elle cherchait l'université ou l'institut où j'étudie actuellement. Donc, tout ça, c'est important parce que ça l'avait intéressé. Donc, en part, cela, c'est comme l'autre l'a dit, c'est sur l'histoire qu'on pose les questions.
Okay, merci beaucoup. So because he only had 10 days to get ready for the interview, he had to send all his proofs and all his documents by email, but he was smart enough to take them also with him. And he did the right thing because the woman in charge of the interview did not receive the email. So she had to leave him alone 20 minutes so she could actually check out all his story and the documents he brought. But just like Shola said, the questions are regarding to his story and sometimes also about his new situation, for example, his situation in the city, about what he's studying, the formations he's going under. So it's very much everything he was preparing for that was asked.
Great, and let's get Kabin's perspective as well, and then we have one last.
Cabine, si vous voulez.
Oui, et c'est à peu près la même chose. C'est la déclaration qui importe beaucoup. Il faut maîtriser ce que tu as fait dans la déclaration. C'est important. Parce que la question de là. Et moi, ma chance a été qu'avec mon avocate, elle m'a posé plusieurs questions sur la déclaration. On a fait des séances d'exercice avant le jour J. Donc, arrivé là-bas, c'est les mêmes questions que l'avocate m'avait posées quand on s'entraînait, c'est les mêmes questions qui ont été posées. Donc, je n'ai pas eu de difficultés par rapport aux questions. Ce sont les mêmes questions que l'avocate a posées. Donc, s'il y a des gens qui doivent partir à l'interview qui n'ont pas d'avocat ou d'avocate qui cherchent un bon avocat pour préparer un bon dossier.
Merci énormément. Je vais traduire ça rapidement. Kabin was saying that he felt the same way. He was lucky enough to have a very good lawyer who prepared him correctly for the interview. Every question he got to answer and get ready for was asked during the interview. So he just recommends anybody here to, if they're lucky enough, to find a good lawyer so they can actually prepare in advance for the interview.
And if you aren't, if you don't have a lawyer, if you're not going to be represented in your asylum interview, you can send Maria and I an email, and we can help you with some of that preparation that Kabin is referencing. Elle, you had a question in the chat. Would you like to ask it?
Oh, just a second. Yeah, I think he responded to my question. He said he went to New Jersey, to the location in New Jersey, and yeah, thank you so for providing those information. I think they're gonna be very helpful for many of us.
Cool. You have a question?
Oui, j'ai une question. Ma question est de savoir si Mohamed vous apportez les preuves le jour de l'interview ou bien vous les envoyez directement au service de l'immigration.
Oh. Bon, comme je vous avais dit tout à l'heure, on m'avait dit d'envoyer par email. Donc, j'ai fait cela, j'ai préparé tout, j'ai envoyé par email. Mais je n'avais pas vérifié s'ils ont reçu ou pas. Ça, je ne l'ai pas fait. Mais j'ai pris la précaution de préparer encore les preuves avec moi pour les envoyer. Donc, in case, elle me dit qu'elle n'a pas, donc j'avais les preuves. Donc, effectivement, elle m'a dit qu'elle n'avait pas les preuves. Donc, je l'ai donné, elle m'a dit de lui donner 20 minutes. Elle a vérifié le dossier et avant de commencer l'interview. Voilà. Mais ce que je veux dire par rapport à ça, c'est pour ceux qui n'ont pas d'avocat comme moi, c'est très bon de contacter, d'avoir des avocats, ça aide beaucoup. Mais moi, j'ai eu une grande chance parce que très tôt, j'étais en contact avec le RIF. Donc, c'est maintenant que je ne viens pas souvent au rendez-vous du RIF, mais dès le début, quand j'étais arrivé nouvellement, je ne ratais pas les séances avec les avocats, les interventions. Donc, ça m'avait déjà préparé. Donc, on a même fait un scénario une fois au RIF d'interview ici. Je ne sais pas si Maria a toujours la vidéo, elle peut toujours mettre ça sur le site internet, ça m'avait beaucoup aidé. Donc, ce scénario m'avait beaucoup aidé, donc j'avais vu comment les questions se posent. Donc, par rapport à ça, j'ai essayé d'assimiler à mon propre histoire. Donc, je pense que suivre les avocats qui viennent au RIF, qui viennent intervenir, c'est très bon. Parce que aussi, heureusement pour moi, juste avant aussi mon interview, lorsqu'on m'a programmé, le RIF avait invité un ancien officier d'immigration qui était venu ce jour et il avait dit aussi comment ça se passe. Donc, ça aussi, ça m'avait vraiment aidé. Donc, à part de là, j'ai eu des amis qui m'ont...
Merci, Mohamed. On va partager l'intervention. On va rappeler à tout le monde cette préparation que l'ancien officier avait présentée à RIF.
Yeah, ça serait vraiment important. Merci beaucoup, madame. Yeah.
I'm quickly going to translate what has been said. The question was about would it be better to send by email the documents or bring them with us during the interview? Mohammed was saying that he did both actually, but since he didn't have a lawyer, he actually used RIF seminars who invited some lawyers to be able to get ready for the interview. And if I'm not mistaken, there's some YouTube videos about that you can actually use to get used to those questions and apply to your own story in order to, it's like a lot of work just using any kind of question that could be asked and just use them for your own story in order for you to be ready for any type of questions that could be asked. And there are like seminars that RIF has been doing that you can check out online if you need some help. But also I would recommend anybody to send an email to Maria or Emma if you're in need for a lawyer, and they'll try to help you in that regard.
Thanks, Marcus. We have time for one last question. Has anybody been sitting on a question this whole time that they want to ask? Okay, going once, going twice. With that, Maria, do you want to say any words to close us out?
Well, we know a lot of you had some questions in the chat that probably were not replied right now, but really feel free to email us, and then we can hopefully answer to some of these questions. And finally, I really want to thank, of course, Melanie for your great work, but also Shola and Kabin and Mohammed for really sharing your experience. And of course, to congratulate you for winning Asylum and wishing you all the best, and also wishing everybody that is here all the best to you for if you have hopefully, and also that hopefully you'll have an interview soon.
Thank you.
And we'd be remiss not also to thank Marcus, David, and Tanzelia for providing interpretation. I know there's nothing like typing in chat at the speed people are talking. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for coming. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Merci.
Thank you.